Today we're going to show you guys how to install our Stage 1 Focus ST oil catch can kit. So let's dive right into it. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to prep the catch can kit by installing the hoses onto the can itself, as well as installing the bracket on the can, along with the drain hose and drain barb. Just stuff to get it ready so that way we're not having to fuss and do this inside the car. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to take the provided hose clamps, just kind of slide them over the hoses. This hose here, this is going to be our PCV hose. This will go on the bottom port of the catch can. This is the dirty port. So a little bit of oil can also help slide these guys on. Once you've got this hose on, we're going to take this hose clamp. You can either use a quarter drive socket or just a flathead screwdriver to tighten this guy up. So we're going to tighten that on. Next up, we're going to take our intake side hose. This hose has a check valve, so this allows only vacuum to go through this system. So you're not going to have any boost going into the system. Main reason for that is we don't want boost leaking past the factory PCV valve, which is just a plastic on plastic connection. So there's no effective seal. So in standard operating procedure, this car is going to leak a little bit of boost into the crankcase. With this setup, it's not going to do that anymore. So we're going to set this up by putting this hose next on the top port. This is our clean port. And the way we want to orient this hose is we're going to want this 90-degree fitting, 90 degrees in orientation with the catch can. Tighten this hose clamp. And the catch can set up now with the hoses on. So the next step we're going to do is we're going to put the bracket on the back of the can. All right, so the next step we're going to do is we're going to attach the bracket itself loosely to the can, just so that way we can get that on. So you're going to take the bracket. You can use either port. We generally recommend using the lower one. We do also recommend a little bit of blue Loctite on the bolt, just so that way vibration-wise it's not going to work its way out. So yeah, we're just going to get this installed onto the can. I'm just taking a 10mm wrench here, just snugging it down. When we tighten this too, we're going to want to try and make sure that the bracket stays nice and kind of parallel to the can. So now that we've got our bracket on the can, we can move on to the next step, which is going to be installing our drain barb onto the bottom of our drain valve. And this guy simply just threads in. Use a little bit of Teflon tape on this, or even just some silicone sealant. All right, so now we're going to take our drain hose and just simply slide it onto the drain barb. This can be held by itself. Alternatively, we do include some hose clamps, so you could secure this on here with a hose clamp. So yeah, now the catch can's prepped, we can go ahead and start getting this ready and installed in the car. So the first step we're going to want to do while we're here in the engine bay is loosen the charge pipe coupler here. So you can either do the top one here or the bottom one. What this is going to do is just allow us to get a little bit more wiggle room when we're pulling the intake manifold back away from the engine. So to do that, you can just take a hose clamp, or just, depends on what hose clamp you have on here. I believe the factory ones are 8mm. Loosen that guy up, kind of pull the charge pipe down a little bit if you can, and that should be good. So next what we're going to do is we're just going to kind of get a couple wires out of the way. So we're going to disconnect this sensor here, just kind of get that out of the way. That way we've got a little bit more wiggle room when we're pulling the intake manifold back. And then there's another connector down here, and this one goes on the high pressure fuel rail sensor. Just going to pull that out. So now we have all this wiggle room with this connector. You can also pull this purge valve hose back a little bit too, just to give ourselves a little bit more wiggle room. So the next step we're going to do is we're going to take this connector here and just move it, basically aggressively slide it this way, so that way it gets off of the little tab here that's on the intake manifold, just so we can get a little bit extra wiggle room when we're working back behind the intake manifold. All right, from here we're going to take off the intake manifold by simply unbolting it. There's 5 10mm bolts that go across the intake manifold here. So the way you want to do these is you want to work outside in. You can do this with a 10mm and a ratchet, but I'm going to use an impact here just to speed things up. Start first with this one. All right, now that all the intake manifold bolts are off and loosened, we can actually physically pull the intake manifold away from the head. It's a little stuck on the dowel here. So now that we have access here, this will give us plenty of room to reach down here to the PCV valve hose. But yeah, for this connector, you want to squeeze both sides of it and just kind of wiggle it while pulling the hose back towards the engine. So now that hose is off, I'm going to do a little modification with the hose. We're just going to turn it on the green part of the PCV valve. Then we're going to turn this 90-degree fitting here over here, because we're going to connect back into this with our new catch can line hose. We can now take our catch can kit, route the drain hose down, and we're going to start first with the PCV line. That's going to connect right into that hose that we just disconnected. And once you'll hear a very satisfying click, and that's how we know that that is in. So next we're going to take the intake manifold line and route this down to where we pulled that line off earlier. You'll hear another satisfying click, and that's how we know that that's on. So when you go to basically mount the can onto the intake manifold, you're going to kind of bend this hose up and just kind of line up the manifold first, kind of get that guy in place, make sure everything is good. All right, we're going to start throwing bolts back in for the intake manifold. Just going to zip it on quick with an impact. All right, so next up what we're going to do is we're going to torque these intake manifold bolts down to 15 foot-pounds. We're doing this install. One thing to note is there's factory O-rings for the intake manifold. That's what seals it. You want to make sure those all stay in place when you take the manifold off and put it back in. As far as tightening goes, start with the innermost bolt and work your way out. Sweet, now that those are all tight, you can take the other provided bolt we have for the catch can and mount it to this hole on the intake manifold. This is just a 10mm bolt. A little bit of medium strength Loctite or thread locker on here. It's always a good idea as well. These ones don't need to get tightened all that crazy. Only about 10 foot-pounds at most. And we can finally snug up this bolt here. Just make sure we hold the catch can in place while we do. And that's pretty much it. So the next step is we're going to want to start the car, let it run, check for any sort of vacuum leaks, make sure everything else is put back in as we removed it. Want to make sure we connect all of our connectors, put all our lines back in place. But that's basically how we install the catch can kit for the Focus ST. So we do also have a written guide on our website that goes into a lot more detail. So if you need a few more steps or if you have any questions, don't ever hesitate to reach out. We can kind of help walk you through it, but it's a very simple install. And yeah, so make sure you subscribe, stay tuned for more.